Have you ever heard of an antique shop that acts more like a film studio? Well, today we're going to break down how one company, Doe Hope, completely changed the game by selling stories instead of just stuff. It's an incredible case study in branding.
So this quote right here, this is their entire philosophy in a nutshell. You know, when you think antique shop, you probably imagine dusty shelves, maybe a bit of a musty smell. Doe Hope said no. Not for us. They decided to treat every single item like a movie star, giving it a backstory, drama, and a cinematic spotlight.
And that's really the big question we're diving into. How on earth did they manage to do this? How do you take something old, maybe a little beat up, and convince people it's a celebrity worth paying a premium for? Let's unpack their playbook. To really get how they pull this off, you've got to look at who's pulling the strings. Because the whole idea, this whole cinematic approach, it all comes from the founder, James Gooch. And his background is, well, it's not what you'd expect. See, here's the twist. Gooch didn't study art history or appraisals. He studied film and video. He came from a world of lighting, camera angles, and storytelling. And that gave him this completely fresh pair of eyes to see the hidden stories and objects that everyone else was just writing off as old furniture.
And that filmmaker's eye, well, that's the bedrock of their whole strategy, their first major pillar. It's a simple idea, but it is so powerful. They aren't selling things, they're selling the stories those things have lived.
This brings us to a brilliant concept they champion, the premiumization of patina. Okay, so patina is just a fancy word for the wear and tear an object gets over time. Normally, a scratch or a crack lowers the price, right? But Doe Hope flipped that completely on its head. For them, those aren't flaws, they're scars. They're proof of a life lived. And that story, that's where the real value is.
This little chart shows you the magic trick. A typical dealer sees a cracked jar and thinks, defect, gotta knock the price down. Doe Hope sees that same crack and says, that's history, that's character. And the result? Where one sees a discount, Doe Hope sees a reason to charge a premium. It's genius, really.
And this quote from the founder just nails it. They see themselves as storytellers first and dealers second. Their entire job is to uncover the story in, say, an old armchair and tell it so well that you feel like you're not just buying a piece of furniture, you're buying a piece of a forgotten history.
Okay, so pillar one is the story. But what's a movie without a stunning visual style, right? You need a genre, a signature look, and that brings us to pillar two, their radically theatrical taste.
So what exactly is their style? You could say it's a specific recipe. They mix a bit of old money, that feeling of quality and class, with a healthy dose of dramatic decorative for that wow factor. And then they sprinkle in faded gentility, which gives it this beautiful, soulful, slightly melancholic feeling.
And this isn't just some vague marketing talk. You can actually see it in the stuff they choose to sell. That faded gentility, it shows up in their gorgeous old country house armchairs. The macabre, that's their wild collection of antique medical tools and curiosities. And the playful, that comes through in the amazing vintage fairground art they find. And this is where they get really smart. They don't just dip their toes into weird stuff, they dive in head first. While other shops play it safe, Doe Hope goes all in on things like macabre medicine and circus art. And by doing that, they totally own that niche, get a ton of free press, and build this fiercely loyal, almost cult-like following.
And look, when your taste is this eccentric, getting the right kind of shout-out is gold. An endorsement from a cultural giant like Stephen Fry is huge. It basically tells the world, hey, this isn't just weird junk. This is intellectually interesting weird stuff. It makes it cool. It makes it desirable.
All right, so you've got the story. You've got the look. What's missing? Credibility. How do you prove you're the real deal? That's pillar 3, building a rock-solid reputation through outside validation.
And just look at how quickly they built that credibility. The timeline is wild. They start in 2008. By 2014, they're winning major awards. A year later, they're in Liberty of London, one of the most famous luxury stores in the world. And then in 2016, 2016 brought the ultimate validation.
I mean, you can talk the talk about being cinematic forever, but what's the ultimate proof? What's the real mic drop moment? How about having your props hand-picked for one of the biggest TV shows in history?
Get this. Doe Hope supplied a set of antique Spanish chairs to Game of Thrones. And they weren't just stuck in the background. No way. These chairs were in Winterfell.
They were used by the villains, the Boltons, and then, in a huge moment, they were reclaimed by Jon Snow and Sansa Stark when they took back their home. The chairs literally became part of the story.
And what that placement gave those chairs is something you just can't buy. It's a concept we can call emotional provenance. Suddenly, they weren't just 17th century chairs anymore. They were the Winterfell chairs, the chairs Jon Snow sat in. That connection, that story, adds this incredible layer of value that will literally last forever.
Okay, let's zoom out and put it all together. What is the actual blueprint here? What can we learn from how Doe and Hope built their brand? It really comes down to 3 clear, repeatable steps.
First, always lead with the narrative. Don't sell the features, sell the story. Second, don't be afraid to be different. Define a radical, unforgettable aesthetic and own your niche. And third, go out and get that validation. Get awards, get into the right stores, get into the press. Let other people tell your story for you. So, if you were to draw it out, their recipe for success would look something like this. The biggest piece of the pie, 40%, is putting that narrative first. And that's held up by their unique theatrical style and that all-important media validation. And does all this storytelling and brand building actually, make money? Oh yeah. This strategy is why they can sell everything from a medieval knife to pricey Queen Anne armchairs. Because for every single item, they've already sold you the story.
When you really think about it, the Doe and Hope story is about so much more than just antiques. It points to this huge shift happening everywhere. We are drowning in products, just endless stuff. So maybe the best strategy now isn't to sell the thing itself, but to sell its script. Maybe the future of business is less about being a salesperson and more about being a great screenwriter.